Walmart responded. I mean, I'd say within a couple of days, they were stuffing stuff back, and they did a really good job. So when you look at there's two things now: the Franklin Graham charities and the and Walmart and a lot of the other I mean, a lot of the other places too, because you would go into like the Dollar General.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 242. I'm talking again with Robin Capehart. Robin's going to talk about what's happened in East Tennessee and the surrounding areas with the hurricanes there. It's been, a month and a half now, but it's still the recovery's ongoing. How are you, Robin?
I'm doing very well, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.
So first of all, Robin, can you tell us about where you live?
We live in Jonesboro, Tennessee, which is just right outside of Johnson City. It's adjacent to Johnson City, and we live a little southeast of it, and we were right on the edge of where the significant damage was done. In our town of Jonesboro, there was just one part on the east end of town that was just completely wiped out. I mean, it was it was a creek that came in and went up, took out the bridge, took out all the houses in one area of town, which is about 3 or 4 miles from our house. And from that point, the more you move east, and even north to a certain degree, the more significant the damage came. Just start with a couple of things that happened. First of all, I was in Texas when it happened, and I kept following it on TV, and I was talking to my wife about it. They had significant wind and rain and things like that, but everybody was advised to stay in. It was one of the typical things where the shelves at the stores were empty. People were worried. Now, fortunately, it didn't impact where we live. We live up on a hill, so it really didn't impact us. But once you get, I mean, there's a little road that we use. It's a little shortcut we take to get to I-26, and I-26 is the main road between I-81 and coming down I-81, which is kind of a north-south, and Asheville. When we went to Asheville's 50 minutes away, and Asheville was kind of a nice little weekend spot, or you can get out for the evening or something. 26 was just devastated. It came in and took out one. It was a 4-lane road, took out the 2 lanes, so many different places that it was closed. Now they do have 2 lanes of I-26 open now, so that just in the last few weeks you've been able to travel down that way. The interesting thing, I-26 was an integral part of people going to Charlotte from that part of the country. People used to get on I-81 and come south down through Virginia and north in Tennessee, and then cut across there to go to Charlotte. The way I always go to Charlotte. There was 2 ways I-26. If you go further down the road, about 40, 50 miles, there's I-40. And I-40 goes east-west, and it's been so wiped out. It's still being unused. They said it will not be open for as a 4-lane road until August or September of 2026. They hope to have I-26 back up by March or April of next year to a 4-lane status. So you can still go down, and you can, but Asheville was such a nice place to go. We're fortunate where we live that we've got some nice places like Gatlinburg. You can go on, it's only a couple of hours away. Asheville was an hour away. So there was some nice places like that you could go. And we would go down to Asheville, and we'd go down to the Vanderbilt, village down there. And that's where we went most of the time when we went.
Yeah.
And to see the pictures of it, and when they showed it on TV, I'm sitting there with my wife watching it, and I said, that's the McDonald's where I stopped and got iced tea. But the place was just devastated. It was full of shops. And this wasn't a small area. This wasn't like one building. But so everything down that way was, one other thing, when we used to go out of Jonesboro, go toward I-26, we would get on the I-26, a little town called Irwin. Irwin's kind of an interesting town. Is the part of it sits up on a hill. It was fine, but part of it where the hospital was and the Walmart and things like that, they were down in, and the very first scenes to come out after the hurricane hit, after the damage hit, was a hospital, which I know exactly where it is. You can see it right off I-26. Was a hospital where there was 50 people up on top of a roof, and they were helicoptering them off. And a lot of the helicoptering came out of Johnson City. They utilized the hospitals in Johnson City, which were just packed. And we would hear helicopters going constantly to rescue people, deliver food, and things like that. It was just something you just never thought you would see.
Yeah, and helicopters were pretty handy in a situation like this because because of all the mountains and the valleys, it's not really that easy to land or have a jet take off. The helicopters work much better in a place like this.
Yeah, 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 and not to the one issue that came up, and you get a little tired of politics once in a while when people just kind of everything they do is from a political angle, like they're trying to play a game, and this wasn't a game. FEMA was extremely slow to respond to that area down in North Carolina. We're only 25 minutes from the North Carolina line, and FEMA was to this day. And what happened was there's a lot of it was in the 1,000-year floodplain. FEMA said we can't come in and set these these little prefab houses or trailers or things. Oh, we can't set them down there because it's in the floodplain. These people don't have any place to live. They don't have any place to stay. I don't care if you set it down and you can get them out of there. They have nothing. They have no shelter whatsoever. And it was just it was watching the bureaucracy act over there. The saving grace from them was up in Boone, North Carolina, which isn't very far from where we live. Is where Franklin Graham has, where Billy Graham had his charities and everything like that. If it wasn't for them, I don't know how many more people would have died during this, because it affected them. They were flooded. Boone, North Carolina was flooded, but they managed to put together, and you could see it in every little town, every church, every place in our area had some kind of effort going on to send relief down, and you had common places to drop it off. And but if it wasn't for them, when you talk to people down there, they'll tell you if it wasn't for Franklin Graham or Billy Graham's group coming in, they would have been, because it was just so hard to get to. I mean, for a couple of weeks there, you couldn't even get into Asheville by anything.
Yeah, you sometimes people bring out the more old fashioned modes of transportation, like they might ride horses or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And helicopters. What was the status of some of the airports there? By the way, I know there's an airport in Asheville. There's an airport in Johnson City.
Asheville's the thing about the mountains is when you get into the mountains, a lot of the airports are up on hills.
Okay,
yeah. So they were okay, but to get up to the airport, if you wanted to go to the airport, you had to start at the bottom of the hill and drive up a road that wasn't there anymore.
Yeah,
and that was part of the problem, and it was part of the problem when they flew things in to the airport, was if you wanted to get it down off there. So fixing those roads obviously were a big priority, so that supplies and food and things like that was being delivered could get distributed. They found flat places to land and parking lots and things on hills, and they managed to get a lot of it distributed. But it was just it wasn't. Look, we grew up in West Virginia. We've seen floods on and off. I remember the big flood in Moundsville in 1972 that went, that covered the whole south end of town down where King Cole Restaurant was, and down that way. And, I
was a year old,
okay.
but I've heard stories.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't get to town. I live south of Moundsville. We couldn't get to town, but it was a couple of days. Yeah. And then it took a while for the stores to get refurbished. I'll tell you the one thing too that was incredible was to see how quickly Walmart responded to a lot of the needs. And keep in mind, it wasn't a lot of the time it was people buying stuff. A lot of the stores were wiped out in Asheville. And I use Asheville as an example. There was tons of smaller towns around Asheville. Asheville was just the biggest town. but how they use things, and they were basically relying up. Then they went to kind of the next ring, and the next ring was Johnson City, Jonesboro, Greenville, Bristol, a little bit.
Greenville, South Carolina.
No, North Carolina. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Tennessee, Greenville, Tennessee.
There's a Greenville in Tennessee. Okay, because
Yeah, it's about
there's a Greenville in South Carolina. There's a Greenville in North Carolina too. Yeah,
right, right. Yeah,
but
it's
the Greenville in North Carolina is way east. But the Greenville in South Carolina is not too far from
it's only it's
where
no.
you are.
As a matter of fact, going down 26 I went to Greenville last summer
Yeah.
in South Carolina, and they were in the middle of a lot of this. They were in the middle of a lot of this too. So, but it wiped out the shelves around us, and but Walmart responded. I mean, I'd say within a couple of days they were stuffing stuff back, and they did a really good job. So when you look at there's two things now: the Franklin Graham charities and the Walmart, and a lot of the other, a lot of the other places too, because you would go into like the Dollar General, and you know that's how I know I'm lost. If I go 5 miles without seeing a Dollar General, I think I'm lost, because there seems to be one every
And
5 miles.
yeah, because to their credit, they seem to have a good way of supply chain management. So
They
they
did,
keep
yeah,
moving
yeah.
pretty quickly. I mean, I didn't realize Franklin Graham, and Boone, of course, is where Appalachian State is.
Right,
Which
and it was closed. Yeah.
Yeah, I find that interesting though, that I didn't realize I knew Billy Graham was around the Carolinas, but I didn't realize he had a connection up there. That's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is interesting. You see a lot of the religious charities doing fairly well. I don't know, although I've heard also, in my experience, the Red Cross is kind of as bureaucratic as the government is. I don't know why that is, but
They had a lot of advertisements.
Yeah.
But FEMA. These people were downright angry because and of course, look, I knew there were politicians that were throwing gas on the fire of it too, but still, it was affecting them. It was affecting them every day, and it was, like I said, this wasn't. You've seen pictures of tornadoes where they go through villages and they'll wipe out a complete. They'll wipe out 3 or 4 houses, and then on both sides of them, their houses look like they haven't been touched. But the devastation here got everybody. It was so bad.
The tornadoes don't seem to impact the roads nearly as much as the flooding does either. I mean, it's amazing when you get a lot of water how powerful it is, and the big thing is
and it was
growing, and we've seen it, even growing up in the northern panhandle of West Virginia, when you see the rain come down, and then you see the dirt come down, and then you see a road. Sometimes you'll see dirt from up above fall on the road and block the road, or trees fall down, or more likely you'll see a slip on the road, and the hill will cave out from underneath the road. So
right,
the road that was 2 lanes now has become 1 lane, and you end up.
Well, that's what you wouldn't believe. You've probably seen some of the pictures of the interstates, though, both 26 and 40. 40 was more devastated. 26 was devastated in certain parts, but the way the water just banging up against the hillside kept eating away and eating away and eating away until the concrete caved in, and then all of their communications went down. I mean, I thought what Elon Musk did was heroic when he came in and basically gave away those satellite phones so people could get in touch some way, and people could find other people. That was part of the problem. I think, watching some of the video and stuff that we've seen locally that probably didn't make it nationally, was people in their homes. They were sitting there watching the water come up, and there didn't seem to be a real sense of panic. And I think it's because they've probably had floods in the past that didn't really kind of affect them. It might have got into their yard or something like that, and and there's just some mud. They're going to clean it off. But man, this just kept coming and coming, and it came fast. I mean, it rose fast to the point that people couldn't even get out.
Because it washes out the roads, just everything. You just can't get out. People can't get in. People can't get. You get those satellite phones too, and you might get somebody to say, "Hey, I'm out here all by myself," and I don't know what the cell phone connectivity would have been in a place like this to begin with. It's often not as good because it's sparse and it's just
It
harder
was,
to build it. And you might be
yeah,
in a place where if you're on top of the hill, you'll do fine. But if you're 100, 200 feet lower, you won't get a signal.
right.
I mean, it's really,
There was a lot of people that were out on the hillsides too, that because
yeah,
they relied upon these country roads that got wiped away. Remember, you don't have to wipe the whole road away. All you got to do is wipe away 10 to 12 foot section of it. Once that's
yeah,
wiped away, the roads you can't get by. You're stuck.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, you can have 4 miles of road, but if you take out, 50 yards of it, or,
Oh my
20
gosh,
yards of it, that means the road's out. That's all.
yeah, it's unusable for anybody from there back. It's
Yeah.
unusable. So
And I suppose what they're probably going to do with 26 and 40 and why they're taking so long is I would hope that they're going to do some things that will shore up the roads.
yeah, well, they're going to have to.
And they'll figure out a way so the next time this happens, the road will survive it.
Well, the whole foundations were wiped away. I mean, it just
Yeah.
the creeks and the rivers just kept, just kept beating against the found that keep beating against it and just worked its way underneath of the road. And then of course they collapsed because the concrete had no foundation. The soil and everything was gone.
Yeah.
So and it was that way in a number of places. Well, you've driven down through when you go down through mountains and hillsides, you're basically following the creek.
Yeah.
Because that's where the flat land was when they built the road.
Yeah. It's easier to build the road, in the creek, and
Yeah.
and that's sometimes where the railroad tracks are as well. They're up a river or up a creek because they want to stay on a level plane, and it's all very, it's interesting how that works out the way they build these things. I mean, it's often miraculous that a road gets built in these places at all. I mean,
Oh, I know.
it's
Yeah.
really, and you have a lot of weight, and in some cases too, you've probably got, situations where maybe that pickup truck or that small van can get to these people, but the real big supply trucks, they're not getting through.
No, they can't. No. To bring it up to date though, it's still impacting people. The people are still, like I said, I mean, I saw something just a week or so ago, and it was people still, they're still saying in public shelters and gyms and things like that. And, I remember when the hurricane hit down in New Orleans. I mean, they must have shipped in a zillion of those little just prefab homes that they came in and sit down, and people had a place to go. And none of that was, or very little of it was being done in North Carolina. Now, what I heard, we always refer to the elections as it's the silly season, and people didn't get silly. And this idea that there were people sitting around with big maps on a table and plotting on how they could get votes, and they said, well, we've got this hurricane, let's make it so those people can't vote. I don't know if that was in the back of the minds of people. I don't think there was any orchestrated conspiracy to do it, but they certainly weren't a priority in getting. I just think it was more that they were I don't think they were incompetent. I think they were incompetent, and I don't think they were prepared to handle something. I think when you go into Florida and places like that, when you have big natural disasters, they're used to it. They've done it before. They know what to do. But I just don't think I don't think even the federal government knew how to handle something this big.
Yeah. And apparently, Ron DeSantis actually had some helicopters or something. He actually said to North Carolina, "Hey, I'll let you borrow some of this stuff. You can use it for your recovery."
We would if you would drive down the road toward Knoxville, and you stop into a little diner or something like that, you would see tons of utility vehicles that were being brought in from other places. So there were workers coming in from everywhere to restore the utilities, because I mean there was no unfortunately it was in the summer, but there was no water, there was no heat, there was no electric, there was nothing like that. And so I mean, people came together. I mean, there was people that didn't even think twice, that said, we're sending our people there to help you. And those people knew they were there doing a good thing. And I mean, I think they're used to helping out tangential areas, county, like in West Virginia, we might go help in Ohio and vice versa. But down there, these were people coming from Georgia and Alabama and all in North Carolina and all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. It was you'd have people coming from all over the place. I know there were some veterans groups and some other people like that. What I often talk about FEMA, but I assume there are also some state government agencies involved with this too, right? Or not?
Well, there's always like the National Guard comes in,
Yeah,
the National Guard will come in and do things, and yeah, there's state emergency agencies, but I think there was a heavy reliance upon the federal agencies. The state agencies seem to be there. It's just that I think once again, I don't think they had the resources to
yeah,
anticipate something this massive, which is the whole idea of having a federal emergency management system. Is that if you just try to defend upon that type of service locally, there's going to be these once every 100-year disasters that happen that they're not going to be able to handle it. And so to be able to have a federal coordinating agency that can come in and help and be big enough to come in and help quickly, that's really important. That's kind of where the failure was. I want to mention one thing too. My wife teaches at East Tennessee State, and she lost. There was a number of students who, in her class, that lost families, had families killed from the floods, had
yeah,
couldn't make it to school. Big accommodations and things like that, and there was a lot of that done. But it's it's amazing how it's amazing. Forget the FEMA thing. It's just amazing how quickly, when things get really, really tough, how people jump in and help other people. And I think that's an attribute that we have in this country that, quite frankly, I don't know that exists anywhere else. At least to the degree that when something like this comes along, people were willing to give whatever they had. Like I said, it was every church, it was every community center, it was every fire hall, every place. There was a deposit place where where you could. You talk about a supply chain, how they appeared. So if people were delivering bleach, like we had a place right in Jonesboro next to one of the churches there, and you could bring stuff there. Well, then it was fed into the supply chain that went to the trucks or went to the helicopters that eventually made it. And it's just amazing how quickly those types of things, can't get together. But yet it takes me 4, 5, 6 days to get a letter delivered from Jonesboro to Moundsville. So,
yeah,
uh, but it was just, it does your heart well to see people, jump in and help other people.
yeah. It's definitely one of those things where you watch this happen. It's yeah, the systems, and I want to make sure we had I mean, and when was the last time this area had been hit by any kind of hurricane or any kind of flooding?
Uh, I've only been there a couple of years, so it's probably been, I think, probably in the mid, a real bad one. I think they talked about the 90s. I think they get flooding kind of like we did in West Virginia. They'll get flooding every few years, but it won't be
Yeah,
bad. But
yeah,
they
yeah,
nothing ever this just devastating. I said it was
yeah,
they wiped out the 1,000-year floodplain. So
yeah. Well, Robin, I don't know if you were still around the area, but the flooding around our area, I remember worse was Shady Side.
oh, I no, I
Yeah,
was in and out then. Yeah, I was.
yeah.
I remember
Because
when.
and that was more of a more of a microburst. I mean,
Right.
it was one of those
That like
storms that just hit a small area, but I think they had maybe 5 inches of rain in an hour, and it
I
hit it.
remember because it was I forget what hurricane was, but the rain centered right over top of the Ohio River, which was, they said, was really strange. It wasn't that the center of the rain was off to the east and it was raining and then it was running
Yeah,
down to the river. It was right over top of the river, and when you dump that much water into the river, it backs everything up, and that's
yeah,
what caused a lot of the mass flooding, was the water couldn't drain.
yeah. Because the flooding I remember, at least growing up on the river, was there was the flash flooding, that came from Shady Side. It was just a rainstorm, which didn't really. In fact,
Yeah.
if you went 15 miles away, there wasn't any rain at all. And that just wiped out houses in one valley. But And then I remember, in 96, there was the big blizzard that happened on a Sunday. And then 2 or 3 days later, it went up to 60 degrees.
Yeah.
So you had this massive snow melt. And so that created flash flooding in a lot of the hilly and mountain areas. But then 2 weeks after the snow, the Ohio River was the highest I'd ever seen it.
Right. And it covered
But
Wheeling Island was the thing that always made the
yeah,
paper. Yeah.
but that was a flood that people were prepared for. They knew the crest was coming, so they could get out quickly. It was
well, and they had been through it to various degrees before.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and like I said, I think that's what separated this from down in there was they had creek beds come up before, but
Yeah,
to get up as high as it did and wipe up people that built their houses. They built their houses to a degree that they thought the water will never get here. I'm at my mom's house right now. We're on top. We're 1,200 feet. We're 600 feet above Moundsville.
yeah.
If it ever makes it up here, then there's
Well,
but
yeah. Well, one thing I remember, about that flood was in some cases it came right up to the railroad tracks, and I'm often
yeah,
wondering if that's the origin of the phrase "the wrong side of the tracks."
right.
Because if you're in between the railroad tracks and the river, you're more likely to get flooded.
Mhm.
I also remember, back in 96, it flooded, it would flood the football field now and then in Moundsville. And one case and since this was in winter, they actually had a basketball game, but they moved the basketball game from the field house to the gym at the high school. So,
Mhm.
which obviously had less seats, but they could still play the game. So
Yeah, very few. They were actually hosting. They had seats for women's basketball, which they did. It didn't have as many as
yeah,
the field house did. I know. So in the aftermath, it's been, as you mentioned at the top of the show, it's been several weeks now since this flood hit, and people went through a lot of this. And the one thing I hope people, it seems like it was a big news story, and everybody was talking about it, and we saw the shelves being empty, and so it had a real impact for a couple of weeks. But it seems like we have a tendency to kind of move from one thing to the other. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And so the people in that area are still hurting, and
oh yeah,
there's still people supporting them. But it seems like, and it is getting better. Some of those towns are getting cleaned up, and and what you can't replace is people that had businesses there for 30 and 40 years had their businesses wiped out. But I hope people wouldn't forget that there's still, and I
yeah,
said you should have, it's eventually you should have this broadcast at this time. So I guarantee you there's not a lot of people talking about the flood right now.
yeah,
And every once in a while, people should just stop for a minute and think, I wonder how it's going down there. And I wonder if there's still anything I can do. Because like I said, we have a short type span, a short time span in between, our thoughts. And so it has a tendency we just have a tendency to move from one thing to the other. And so I wish people would every once in a while, like I said, we live it, so we still see it once in a while.
yeah.
We don't hear as many helicopters as we did before. Uh,
Mhm.
there's still supplies that are being taken in from churches and things like that. But the topic has moved on, and
Yeah.
people take time to consider that.
Well, I think when the election came, that kind of took the attention away
Yeah.
from Hurricane Helene, and then Hurricane Milton happened, and that although that wasn't as bad, but it hit parts of Florida. So there were two. We had a couple hurricanes this year that seemed like they were pretty bad. I don't know, and I've certainly heard my various conspiracy-minded people who think that maybe this is all planned. And I mean, I've been to, and the place I've visited them probably as much as any in Mexico is Acapulco.
Mm-hmm.
Acapulco got hit by a hurricane last year and hit by a hurricane this year, and it's just they still hadn't fully recovered from last year, and then they get hit with another one. And
Yeah.
I saw this hotel where I stayed, where all this stuff was blown into it, and just
Right.
it was really awful. And the worst thing about the hurricane last year was it went from a depression to a Cat 5 in like 2 or 3 days. Nobody
Wow.
was prepared for it. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't hear much about that back this way.
Well, I don't think you hear as much about it because Acapulco's star is kind of fallen. It's
Yeah.
it's not the place it was 50 or 60 years ago because it's a crossroads for the drug cartels. I think it's actually, I think most people who go to Acapulco now are just, Mexicans from Mexico City and stuff like that more than Americans, but
yeah,
because there's a lot of other places that are more popular now, but
right.
it's an amazingly beautiful place though, with the way the way that mountains and the cuts and the cliffs and go into the ocean. It's you can see why it was so big, why it was as big as it was. But yeah, so yeah, this is one thing you do see people really come together. It's like sometimes there is a unifying aspect to disasters like this. I mean,
right.
It's unfortunate that it has to happen this way.
Right. Yeah, it is. You're right. It is. Because quite frankly, a lot of the places there's people in need and there's some poverty. It's not really as bad. It's not really as bad as around where we are as it was where, say, for example, when I was in Bluefield and you had McDowell County and some places like that, it was heartbreaking. But
we didn't really have many issues up there. I think a little bit of Southwest Virginia got hit, but it didn't really.
The town of Bluefield got hit pretty hard with wind. There was a couple of places there that got hit pretty hard, but it wasn't the water. And the problem they actually do have flooding in Bluefield, even though it's kind of on a hill, and most of it's caused from their drainage system isn't big enough to basically handle a lot of water at one time, and so that's where they get their flooding from backing up.
Yeah, a lot of these places, you occasionally would hear about flooding, in the mountains, towns and stuff like that, because it was
right.
Because valleys are just natural gutters, and they're taking in all this water, and it's all coming in at once, and it's really just amazing the pressure that happens. And one thing, I mean, wind can be bad, but it doesn't really harm your roads, I don't think. And
no,
not the way
flooding. Well, it does. It'll knock stuff.
It certainly knocks down the trees and the buildings, though.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the telephone wires and the electric wires. Yeah, that's something. When there's a disaster, you're definitely called out to work on those lines and get those poles back up. It's
Well, I lived right on the main road, main street through the middle of Bluefield, and I would look out. It's a really pretty community, but what I could never understand is why they didn't put the lines underground. That was one thing we had at West Liberty when I went in, and one of the first things I noticed was all the lines, except the ones coming in from the outside, but all the lines in between buildings and everything was underground, and it made things a heck of a lot. Aesthetically, it helped a lot.
Yeah. What are the costs involved with that? I don't really know. Versus having the poles and versus having them underground.
Well, did you ever see the pictures of places like Wheeling you go back into the 1920s and 30s when people were just starting to get electric? It was almost like everybody had their own wire. You'd remember seeing those poles, and they would have, instead of like one main wire, they would have they'd be 10 or 12 deep, and they'd all have all these wires running all over them and everything.
Yeah, you'd have that. Yeah.
Instead of putting bigger wires up, they just put more wires up. So, yeah.
Yeah, you see some of those old, and you still would remember some of the old posts on the railroad tracks.
Yeah. Well, I hope your listeners will keep us in mind about.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, just check in to find, and I appreciate you bringing this topic up again, because it is something that's ongoing. It's obviously getting better every day, but they're a long way from recovery, and it's a shame because Asheville. Asheville is a great tourist. It's a big tourist town. It's got does a lot of arts and music and things like that. And of course, the Vanderbilt mansion actually sits up on top of a hill. But the village down at the foot of it was just completely destroyed. And I'm sure there's a lot of your listeners that were familiar with that area. Like I said, when you went to town, that's where you went.
Well, you get a lot of fall tourism for people wanting to come and see how the leaves are and watch the colors change.
Yeah.
That often happens. And then I've noticed around Thanksgiving, the tourism falls off a cliff because it finally gets cold and people just get into Christmas. But, unfortunately, the consciousness just goes from one thing to another, and I think the consciousness was on this, but then the election came and this just went out of the conscious. It seems like to me,
that's what they're going to miss this year is Asheville is a big Christmas town. because it had so many shops and stores and things like that. And they really did because of the relationship with the Vanderbilt Mansion. They really did a lot of. It was a big Christmas deal, as is, like, for example, as is Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and those places down that way. A lot of those towns do a lot over Christmas, and I just don't think they're going to be. Well, I know they're going to be able to do it because there's nothing there for them to handle. So.
Well, yeah, just like the Festival of Lights back at Ogilvy Park in Wheeling, West Virginia,
Festival of Traffic.
Yeah.
When you live out that way, like I did for 7 years, it was very pretty. You're glad all these people were there. But man, getting in and out of West Liberty was, you had to know all the.
I can imagine, but I also remember, knowing the area, it was always easy to find ways around the traffic. It's a go in the back,
that way.
Go in the back door. Go in the back. I mean, because there are lots of ways to go to Ogilvy Park. Go in the back way or something like that. Just
if there's anybody up that way, they've done a massive renovation of Wilson Lodge, and I haven't been in it. But I was visiting a buddy of mine yesterday, and he said it's really nice what they've done there. The problem. I know we're getting off track here, but the problem I've always thought with Ogilvy Park is they tried to be both a small city park and a resort.
Yeah.
And at some point, you can't do both, because a city park is not going to charge, $125 for a round of golf.
Yeah.
But yet, if people go to a resort, they're used to higher prices for things.
Yeah.
And so, and it looks like now they've pretty much settled in that Wilson Lodge is going to be a resort. You can still get some local passes and things like that for some of their activities, but they're really focused on bringing people in from outside the area.
Yeah.
And I mean, that doesn't mean people from inside the area can't do it also, but they charge what I would call resort prices.
Yeah, well, people who live within a 50-mile radius aren't going to stay at the hotel.
No,
it's a day trip for them.
Yeah.
So,
although you get these golf in the spring and the late fall, you'll get these golfing groups that come down from Cleveland and Pittsburgh. They come and stay at the resort, but the resort's been redone. That it has a chop house, which is an upscale steak place, from which my buddy told me. He said, you're not going to get out of there for less than probably $150.
Yeah.
And so I know the Western Steakhouse is still open over at the mall, so I'm covered there. I don't need to worry about going there.
Yeah, and there are plenty of places still to go in Wheeling. You can still. But anyway, so that's another thing. How does something like this impact your Christmas and your Thanksgiving? With Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, it's got to put a damper on it.
Oh, well, and they relied, towns like going back to Asheville, towns like that relied upon the Christmas season to do, to bring in a lot of people, and it's just not there. Now, you could say, well, these people will probably go somewhere else, and that's probably true. They'll find other small towns to go to visit, but that's why I think it's important not to forget these people. Like I said, we were significantly just like one into town and going everywhere from about 4 miles from my house to about 10 miles. There was an area there that was just completely devastated. And I have a church, a group at my church, and I have one guy that I lost from my group because I've lost two people who have went over there. This one fella he's a very accomplished carpenter, construction worker, and things like that. And he's retired, and he goes over there, and I just talked to him the other night about it, and he said the devastation's it's going to take a long, long time to bring that place back.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me wonder if this is still going to impact the tourism season in the summer, and it probably will.
Yeah, it's not going to. Yeah, I don't think they're going to be back into their full stride by summer. There was two parts to it. There was two parts to to Asheville. Like I said, there was the little village there that was right down from the Vanderbilt Mansion. It's completely devastated. But they also had a kind of an artsy district up on the main street, up on the hill.
Yeah.
Because of where it was, I don't think it was devastated as much. But you know what? They're going to go through a period of 2-3 months where these stores aren't going to be able to sell anything. And these people rely upon some kind of consistent business even during the down periods. And there was an advertisement. They've been running ads in our Johnson City newspaper, and then you'll see it online. And it's a list of the towns that are open, because apparently when someone saw certain
Mhm.
towns that like Asheville or some of the smaller towns up through there that weren't there was no access, they were automatically assumed you couldn't go anywhere in Western North Carolina. And so you saw these ads run for several weeks, like, we're still open, come and visit us. And there was a lot of towns that most of them set up on hills, and their roads weren't destroyed and things like that. And so, but they were starting to see their their visitation, their people come from outside, declining significantly because people thought they just couldn't go. And there are ways to get into. There's ways to get into those towns that you don't have to
Yeah.
worry 26 or 40. So
I guess one good thing is I haven't really heard much about crime or anything like that. Is that going on or not?
no, I've seen little or no reports on things like looting
Yeah.
and things like that. Honestly, I don't think there was anything in some of these towns. There wasn't anything left to loot.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
it really just took inventories and wiped them out. And it's amazing what the stuff you saw flowing down the river, including houses and gas stations and things
Yeah.
like that. Just
Of
ripped off.
course, everybody in this area probably has at least one gun at home. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah. I suppose
I,
also that you
most
probably have
most
maybe you have some people have friends or family who live out of the area and they just might go live with them for 3 months. You
yeah.
might have family in Nashville or family in Charlotte or family in Atlanta or something like that, and you just go stay with them for a while. Or
There were so many people. There's so many people from these areas that are growing, like Asheville.
yeah,
There's so many people that they don't have family from around there. But once
yeah,
again, I think the church has stepped in. You know, I know the schools were open. They set up temporary shelters for
yeah.
schools that are still being used today. So so they've
Yeah,
managed. They've tried to accommodate it.
you can put a lot of temporary beds into a gym. It's
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I know they're using places like basketball courts and indoor football stadiums and stuff like that. Although sometimes it
Well,
doesn't always
yeah. The,
work
the
out that
biggest
well.
the biggest problem is there's just so many people whose homes are
Yeah,
just completely gone. There's not there's not just water. It's not just water coming up, going down.
Mhm.
You've got a bunch of mud in your basement or even in your living room,
Yeah,
and you scrape it off, and now you can go back to living. I mean, you probably saw the pictures of homes that were picked up off their
oh
foundation,
yeah,
and they rode down the river. They would crash into bridge abutments and be destroyed. And I mean, it was just everything. So, and a lot of them did not have flood insurance because they couldn't get it. But then again, it's 1,000-year floodplain. You don't expect it to happen. And so, like I said, it's just I'm sure, I look forward. I would say sometime next summer, you'll see someone come out with some kind of, coffee table
yeah.
book that'll show the pictures and everything. And that'll be interesting to see because people still, will still remember it.
Well, that's one thing you get, and I'll admit sometimes I've done it. You get people who drive through just to go sightseeing because it
Well,
is it,
we
it is it is very interesting to see it happen, but it's also
we'd love, my wife and I've talked, we'd love to drive down, but
yeah,
I've always talked about, I don't, I don't want to be one of those people that, they there's those people that slow down to look at car wrecks, you
yeah,
know, and uh, I don't want to be one of those people. What people down that area can do is start visiting some of these small towns that have, they all have something a little unique. They all have little restaurants and little places you can go, and is to visit some of the ones that weren't affected because they're struggling now also.
yeah. They're struggling because the people have moved out and the lack of roads, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's a
and there's a lot of them. So you're
Yeah.
you're gonna call me the next flood too? Am I going to become your go-to guy for?
It's hard to say, Robin. One thing is I have a rule that I don't bring anybody back for 50 shows, and you just went over that threshold, so that's why because there were a few other people said, "Why? 50 shows," so that's why I said, "Well, you were the first guy." Okay. Oh, I can bring Robin back now and ask him about. I did have another person who was on who went and did some relief a while back, but
Yeah.
This will probably be. I still haven't anybody come on and talk about Acapulco. I know that's not in America, but that's certainly a place that's.
Yeah. I'll tell you the one thing I would like to come back on is I'm really interested in seeing what the Trump administration is going to do to education, and because I think you're going to there's so much centralization of education.
Yeah.
These accreditors.
Oh yeah.
These accreditors are more interested in whether or not you've got a faculty member on the landscaping committee than whether or not your students are actually learning. You know, when creditors come in, 80 to 90% of the stuff they look at is, are you complying with the process? We had one creditor come in and they completely skipped the fact that our schools, that we had one school in which our students were really underperforming on standardized tests. They didn't even mention it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's the reason they're there. But boy, to make sure that you've got enough PhDs and you've got people to do this and you've got this committee together and you've got this thing. I mean, that's all they were concerned about. And I remember during the last Trump, I know we're getting off topic here, but I remember when the Trump administration came in the last time, one of the things they did was they loosened up the monopolies that existed on accreditation. You have your institutional creditors. The country was divided up into, I don't know, 7, 8, or 9 districts, and if you lived there, that was your accreditor. And the Trump administration come in and said, no, you can go get any national accreditor you want. And so you did have a lot of people jumping from one accreditor to the other. And what's interesting is you had the accreditors. Imagine this, the market doing this. Just imagine the free market working.
Yeah.
That people, what you saw was the accreditation. You saw the accreditors starting, in even small ways, starting to respond to some of the things that they were doing. That just it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, to me, what they ought to do is they ought to come in and look and see. And not if your kids are graduating. You can graduate everybody if you want. That's not hard.
Yeah.
But are your kids learning? Look and see how your nursing students are doing on their standardized on their license.
Yeah.
Look at how your engineering graduates are doing. Take their standardized tests that you can. I remember, you don't remember this, you're too young, but I'm sure Mike did. Bethany College used to have a comprehensive examination you had to take to graduate that covered all the liberal arts. But there's things like that you can do. How many of your kids are getting jobs? If your kids in their field, not getting a degree and going out, right now, 50% of college graduates are getting jobs in areas that don't need a college degree. And that's what in higher education. So I'm really hoping the Trump administration, grabs a hold of this and start looking at some of the reform that needs to take place. So if I'm under 50 shows, still call me back.
Robin, that's one thing too, that I often wonder about, because having worked in computers, there were lots of people there who had, a degree in biology or a degree in something that had nothing to do with the field. Mm-hmm. Although I think that's fairly common all around, though, that you have a lot of people doing jobs that aren't related to the degree they have. I mean, and having, I was amazed. I'm often impressed, myself at having, who went to math competitions, seeing people from those math competitions who went into fields that had nothing to do with math.
Right.
So
a lot of times people will bring people from math because they've got good logical problem solving skills.
Yeah.
And that's what's completely that's completely ignored in higher education to a great extent. Is that the idea that problem solving, critical thinking, communication skills, we replace that with standardized tests, sit in the seat 3 hours a week for 15 weeks, get a C, and graduate and get a degree, and that's supposed to determine competence, and it doesn't. And this isn't me speaking. This is employers speaking. These, there's people, they're hiring people with college degrees, that can't solve simple problems. I mean, and I want to talk about problems, not even math problems. I mean, just problems at work,
Well, sometimes it would even be said of, various professional certifications that aren't,
right.
that they say you just have a paper certification. It's not really, you just took a test
Doesn't
and
really
passed it.
mean anything. Yeah.
And when you're in the real world for a while, you realize there is no substitute for experience. But how do you get experience? You can't go, order it on Amazon or buy it at Walmart. Somebody has to give you the experience. But
who does this well, Chris? You know who does this well? The unions. The unions in training plumbers. If you get a union plumber or union engineer or electrician, now, and by the way, there's some that aren't unions that are just as competent. But if you get someone from a union, that the unions will not let you go out and put that union bug on your hat and work at a job unless you're competent.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
And they're really competent, but we don't do that in higher education. We just, our goal is it's the whole setup. This is a topic for another show. So
yeah, it's a topic for another show. And I wonder too, though. Talking about Trump versus Harris. How much do you think that impacts people, though? Because I can imagine a lot of people are saying, why does our president care more about, some people getting killed in Israel than they care about Americans who lost their homes here in Appalachia?
Yeah, I think that had a tremendous impact on the election, and I think you can look at some counties in western North Carolina that had traditionally gone red, gone blue, that had gone red this time, simply because look, that was one thing about this last election. It really does seem like the incumbents really did not connect with what people were dealing with every day. And it wasn't just Chris Baker and Robin Capehart. It was everybody was going to the supermarket. Everybody was going to the gas station. Everybody was trying to start a business and found a bunch of hoops, they had to jump through. Healthcare became more difficult. Everybody was going through that, and they didn't get it. And maybe when you just hang around a bunch of rich people who those aren't problems for them, because they can afford whatever happens to them. It's just, you talk about being out of touch. It was amazing.
Yeah, and this is something, that's always going to be there, because hurricanes are always going to come in September and October. So they're always going to be close to elections unless we move the elections.
Yeah.
It's and that's something that could maybe make or break a governor, or maybe make or break a sheriff or something like that. If the sheriff is is really bad, or if the sheriff is really good, and you probably. And there are probably some sheriffs who were real heroes during all this too,
Well, one presidential candidate waited about 6 or 7 days to come to Western North Carolina.
Yeah.
And came to like Winston-Salem. Well, that's hours away.
Yeah.
They're in Winston-Salem or Raleigh or Durham or someplace like that.
Yeah.
That's hours away.
And the people in California aren't going to know that, but you're going to know that,
Yeah, well, the people that lived in Western North Carolina certainly knew it.
Yeah, that's one thing about living in Texas, is anytime there's any kind of weather event anywhere in Texas, somebody will ask me about it, and I'm like, well, that's 500 miles away, so I'm not no impact. It's yeah, as you point, I mean, I know geography more than people on average. So I know those things, but going into the thick of things, I think, and it generally looks like it's good PR,
Well, that didn't help. That didn't help at all, because the people you're really trying to touch is the people who have been, and it was just kind of a fly in, do a press conference, fly out. But like I said, you would have had to get in a, you'd had to get in an you'd have to get a 4-wheeler to get up into some of these areas, and there was no
Yeah.
effort. It was fly in, make a comment, say things are really bad and we're really concerned, and then leave. I'm sorry, we still live in people wanted to see people. They wanted to see people coming there. I think that's why Ron DeSantis handled a lot of the tornadoes down there so well.
Yeah.
Number one, they were prepared. But
Yeah. Yeah, they have it every year. They've got a game plan. That's part of what helps them. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to take my family somewhere. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, Robin. It's been great having you on here.
Yeah. Great having me on. Thanks. I enjoyed the talk.
Yeah. Where can we find you out there?
Right now I'm in
on the web and stuff.
You can go to robincapehart.com.
Yeah.
www.robincapehart.com. There's email addresses and phone numbers on there if you want to get in touch with me.
And of course, please,
some of your folks.
Please like my novel, or please go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Subscribe, check out my Substack. Go subscribe to this channel. Go like the video. Go to buymeacoffee.com if you want to support the show. Thank you, Robin Capehart. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.